This sign means he's more in love than he realizes. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Carl Jung. Sometimes, love doesn't announce itself with words, but whispers through instinctive gestures, unspoken glances, and unconscious loyalty. In today's video from Spiritual Wisdom, we'll explore how a man can be more in love than he even realizes, and what subtle signs reveal the truth his ego may still be hiding. Have you ever felt someone's soul speak louder than their words? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's reflect together on the hidden language of the heart. 1. The unconscious reveals what the mind hides. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung's insight becomes especially powerful when it comes to love, because what we feel isn't always what we can admit. A man may not say he loves you, but his unconscious might already be holding you as the center of his emotional world. He might speak in neutral tones, yet his eyes soften when they find you. He may stay silent in a room full of people, but you feel the energy shift every time you walk by. That's not wishful thinking. It's the soul revealing what the ego isn't ready to confess. Spiritual love does not always arrive in grand declarations. It shows up in the body, the breath, the unguarded gaze. While his mind may still be analyzing, measuring, or denying, something deeper has already made its choice, and that's where the truth lies. Most women confuse this silence for rejection, but in the realm of spiritual awakening, silence can be sacred. It is the space where transformation begins. The truth is, when a man is truly moved by a connection, it doesn't always make him bold. It makes him still. Because what he feels for you isn't just attraction, it's recognition. His unconscious has found something ancient in you, something his conscious mind hasn't even fully understood. And this is why his behavior might seem inconsistent. Some days, he seems distant. Other days, inexplicably drawn to you. But these fluctuations are not signs of confusion. They are symptoms of awakening. He's not just falling in love. He's confronting the parts of himself that are changing because of you. His psyche is rearranging because your presence is pulling something real out of hiding. This is not modern romance. This is a spiritual connection, and it follows a deeper rhythm. The more intuitive you are, the more you'll feel it not in his words, but in his hesitation, his glances, his quiet reverence. It's in how he remembers small things you say. It's in how his body faces you in a crowded room. It's in how he becomes more himself around you without even realizing it. You are not imagining this. You are witnessing a man battling with the unfamiliar truth that love is not always loud. Sometimes it begins in the unconscious, where real bonds are formed not through performance, but through presence. You don't need him to spell it out. You already feel it in the silence between you, in the energy that lingers when he walks away, in the sacred way his soul speaks without words. Trust that. Because the unconscious always knows first. And when the soul has already chosen, the heart eventually follows. 2. Subtle behaviors speak loudly. He doesn't confess it outright, but it's in the way his eyes soften when he thinks you're not watching. the subtle shift in his voice that only happens when he speaks to you, and the inexplicable concern he shows for your well-being, even when there's no clear reason to worry. These are not just coincidences. They are signals of a deeper truth his conscious mind hasn't yet caught up with. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious reveals what the conscious mind represses. And in matters of love, this revelation often comes through body language, energetic presence, and silent devotion. When a man's soul connects with yours on a level beyond words, his behaviors become the messengers of emotions he doesn't fully understand. He notices when your energy drops before you even say a word. He remembers small things you never expected him to notice, like the song you hum when you're anxious, or how your tone changes when you're hiding sadness. That kind of attentiveness doesn't come from logic. It comes from emotional resonance. In spirituality and spiritual development, we learn that energy speaks before action, and connection often shows itself in the gaps between language. The man who appears distant may actually be overwhelmed by a depth of feeling he doesn't yet have the tools to name. He may not tell you he loves you, but he'll hold space for your emotions, instinctively protect your boundaries, and react with a quiet urgency when something threatens your peace. That's because his unconscious self is already invested. The more spiritually aware you become, the more clearly you'll recognize this hidden devotion. It's in how he places your comfort above his own in subtle ways, how his eyes flicker with worry when you're hurting, how he mirrors your emotional state without realizing it. His unconscious actions are often more revealing than any spoken promise. True love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands silently beside you, watches you gently, and gives without demanding anything in return. In spiritual development, we begin to see love not as a performance, but as a presence felt, not forced. The world tells us to look for grand gestures, but real love often hides in the quiet. When you tune into the spiritual language of connection, you'll begin to understand that his protectiveness, his attentiveness, his quiet loyalty, these are not random. They are the soul's way of choosing you before the mind has found the courage to speak. The most powerful love stories often begin in this silent space, where the unconscious reaches out, and without saying a word, his spirit says everything. Do you feel the unspoken signs too? Then claim it with a faith comment below. I am chosen by love. I believe. And if this message resonates with your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to keep growing with us on this journey of spiritual wisdom. 3. Silence and presence. Hold meaning. True love doesn't always arrive with loud declarations or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it speaks in silence, in presence, in energy. When a man is truly in love more than he consciously realizes, it often shows up in the way he simply wants to be near you without needing to fill the space with words. That kind of silence is not emptiness, it's emotional safety. His soul feels at home next to you. Carl Jung's spiritual wisdom reminds us that the unconscious reveals what the conscious mind cannot say. And in love, this means his truest feelings bypass his lips and show up in his behavior, his body language, and even his stillness. If he sits with you quietly, without awkwardness, that's not indifference, it's intimacy. He may not even fully understand why being around you gives him peace, but it does. And when you're not around, that same soul quietly panics, feeling an inner restlessness he can't quite explain. He might become distracted, more withdrawn, or even contemplative, not because he's moving away from you, but because your absence shifts his internal balance. These are not small signs, they're deeply spiritual. They reveal an intelligence far more intuitive than logic. Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." When his soul has recognized yours, the transformation has already begun. Even if he hasn't spoken a word about love, he might soften his tone when talking to you, unconsciously mirror your movements, or protect your space without being asked. He becomes emotionally attuned to your moods without understanding how or why. He may not write poetry, but the way his energy shifts around you is a kind of silent poetry only the heart can hear. Love at this level doesn't require definition because the soul already knows. This is not ordinary attraction, it's vibrational resonance. In spiritual awakening, we call it energetic alignment, a state where your frequency impacts his reality. Even if he denies it or can't name it, his unconscious continues to speak through his presence, his behavior, and his reactions. And the irony is, the more in love he is, the less able he may be to explain it. Sometimes, love becomes so unconscious that it disrupts his sense of control. He finds himself overthinking, wondering why he can't stop thinking about you, and feeling vulnerable without knowing why. And that vulnerability scares him because it bypasses his emotional defenses. His love doesn't roar, it whispers. It doesn't rush, it lingers. It lives in the way he waits for you to speak before he interrupts. It's in how he listens without distraction. It's how he remembers the small things, the subtle things, the details no one else would notice. His presence becomes the proof, and in that presence, you discover something more sacred than spoken love, a kind of emotional intelligence that reflects a spiritual bond beyond reason. He may not say he's in love with you, but his soul has already decided, and in every quiet moment, he's revealing a truth that words cannot contain. 4. Transformation is a sign of soul-level love. When a man is more in love than he realizes, his life begins to shift in quiet yet undeniable ways. His routines, once stable and predictable, begin to rearrange themselves to accommodate your presence not out of obligation, but because his energy has already made space for you. Time becomes fluid around you. Moments that were once reserved for solitude or structure are now unconsciously gifted to your shared connection. He doesn't even realize he's doing it, but the pull toward you has already redirected his patterns. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is fate at work beneath the surface, his unconscious mind building a world where you are already a part of his tomorrow. He starts to speak differently. You hear your name in conversations about the future. Little plans, once imagined alone, now include you without hesitation. It's not just romantic talk, it's integration. His psyche has already chosen you, and while his conscious mind may still be catching up, the script has been rewritten. He no longer sees the road ahead as a singular journey. Instead, he begins to visualize a life in which your presence is interwoven into his growth. This is a spiritual awakening in disguise, where his soul moves before his logic can process why. Love is the teacher, and you have become part of the curriculum through which he will expand, soften, and transform. More revealing than any plan or gesture, however, is his vulnerability. You notice he begins to show sides of himself that were once hidden in shadow. His pain, his doubts, his quiet fears, he begins to offer them not as burdens, but as bridges. When a man trusts you with what he hides from the world, he's telling you something sacred. You are his safe space. This is not weakness, it's spiritual wisdom. In a society where strength is often equated with silence, vulnerability is a revolution, and he chooses to bring that revolution to you. That's not random. That's love evolving past ego. Carl Jung taught that only the wounded physician heals, and here, in his unveiling, you are witnessing the beginning of his healing journey. Not because he needs you to fix him, but because the connection itself allows him to be seen without shame. These shifts, reorganized routines, imagined futures, and surrendered hearts are the soul's quiet language of love. He may not say the words yet. He may not even understand what's happening within him. But the signs are all there. Transformation is the evidence. Spirituality is not always about grand awakenings under moonlight. Sometimes it's about how deeply a person begins to change in your presence without even knowing why. Love is alchemy. And when you see him evolving, not just for you, but because of you, you can trust that something divine is unfolding in real time. His unconscious knows it. His behavior shows it. His soul has already made the choice. 5. Emotional resonance without words. Even when he hasn't spoken the words, his soul responds to yours with a quiet certainty that defies logic. He instinctively shields your name when you're not around, defending your character in conversations where you're completely absent, not because he's trying to impress anyone, but because something deep within him feels responsible for your peace. His care isn't performative. It's woven into his natural responses, like making sure you're okay without needing a reason, like listening closely to your energy even when you say everything's fine. This is a man whose unconscious is already entangled with yours, whose emotional rhythm has started to move in sync with yours so intimately that your joy lifts him and your pain silently echoes through him. According to Carl Jung, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. That reaction isn't always dramatic. It can be silent, sacred, and deeply spiritual. A form of love that matures through presence instead of promises. Many people confuse emotional stillness with indifference. But in the realm of spirituality and spiritual development, stillness is often the ground where love first roots itself before blooming into action. When a man begins to reflect your emotions like a mirror, not through imitation, but resonance, it's because something within him recognizes something within you. This type of emotional resonance is not learned. It is remembered at the soul level, activated by a connection that feels destined rather than deliberate. He may not fully understand it himself, but his body, his instincts, and his heart have already made the choice his mind hasn't caught up to. In a world that often prioritizes verbal confessions, we forget that love speaks in energy, in patterns, in presence. So if he defends you, if he nurtures you without being asked, if your sadness finds a home in his chest, don't overlook it. This is love in its most raw, unfiltered form, spiritual, unconscious, transformative. And when it happens, it's not just about romance. It becomes a sign of your own spiritual growth, a mirror reflecting the maturity of your soul and the kind of energy you now attract. Let this emotional resonance guide your heart beyond words. If you feel the truth in this message, comment below, "I trust the silence of love." And don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell to continue this journey with us into deeper spiritual wisdom. 6. Effort without expectation. When a man puts in effort without needing to be seen, praised, or rewarded, that is not just affection, it is unconscious love quietly blooming. He remembers the smallest things you said in passing, not because he tries to impress you, but because your voice lives rent-free in his memory. He shows up without warning, not for attention, but because something in him is drawn to your presence, as if his soul has already made its decision before his conscious mind can catch up. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And in love, this is exactly what happens. His unconscious reveals truths his words are too slow to confess. Spiritual wisdom teaches us that the deepest form of love isn't loud, it's intelligent. It operates beneath the surface, weaving into daily life, showing up in subtle ways. How he aligns with your world without being asked. How he becomes curious about the things you love. How his routines bend gently to accommodate your energy. This is not manipulation or game playing. This is soul-level intelligence awakening through love. And yet, he may not even realize why he's doing it. Because in Jungian psychology, the heart often makes decisions long before the mind is ready to admit them. His silence is not lack of feeling. It's the storm of feeling before it finds the right words. Real love doesn't always look like romantic speeches or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it's his willingness to support your dreams, to show up during your hard days, or to simply be near you without needing anything in return. These are not accidents. These are signs from the unconscious, expressing what the ego is still learning to process. Jung believed that the self, the core of our being, uses relationships as a path to wholeness. So when he starts reflecting your values, stepping into your world, adjusting his energy to meet yours, it's because his soul recognizes something in you that his intellect hasn't yet fully understood. This is the intelligence of love unfolding beneath the surface, where logic can't reach. He's not trying to win you over with charm. He's becoming someone who belongs in your life. The consistency, the quiet effort, the unconscious pull, these are the signs that he is more in love than he realizes. And while he may never say it out loud in the timing or language you expect, his actions speak with a spiritual clarity that transcends words. His love, though silent, is sincere. And in that silence, his soul may already be choosing you every single day. 7. You become his emotional home. When a man starts to find peace in your presence, it's not just comfort, it's transformation. He may not say the words, but his body begins to speak the language of surrender. His breath slows, his gaze lingers, his energy softens in ways he doesn't even understand yet. Carl Jung believed that what is unconscious will eventually find a way to express itself. And here, love is doing just that, not through grand gestures, but through the small, sacred signs that he feels safe with you. You are no longer just someone he's interested in. You're becoming the place where his soul rests. In a world that constantly demands his strength, you become the one space where he doesn't need to perform. He doesn't need to be perfect. He doesn't need to fix anything. And in this surrender, a deep spiritual awakening is unfolding within him. He doesn't realize it yet, but you've become his emotional home. His nervous system recognizes it before his mind does. That's why he relaxes when you walk into the room, why his defenses lower when you touch his arm, why he listens more than he speaks when you share your heart. He's not being distant. He's absorbing you. He's letting your presence rewire something inside of him that never felt safe before. This is the kind of connection that doesn't scream, but whispers. It doesn't chase, it anchors. He may still show up with hesitation, with habits shaped by years of emotional armor, but his soul is slowly choosing you. Not because you asked, not because you proved anything, but because your energy speaks the language of home. It's not about possession, it's about resonance. It's not about logic, it's about vibration. And that's what makes it so powerful. You become the place where he can let his shadow be seen without shame, where he can be flawed and still feel loved, where he's no longer reacting from the survival patterns of his past, but slowly aligning with the truth of his spirit. Love, in its highest form, isn't just a feeling, it's a frequency. And when that frequency matches something within him, he no longer needs to search. He simply returns. That's the essence of spiritual wisdom. Love doesn't conquer, it awakens. And this man, who may have once guarded his heart behind silence or confusion, is now finding clarity in your presence. He may not yet call it love, but everything in his being is moving toward you. That is not coincidence, it's soul memory. It's the quiet realization that in your arms, he is finally free to be. And in that freedom, he is already more in love than he realizes. 8. The soul chooses before the mind understands. When Carl Jung said that the unconscious chooses long before the mind understands, he wasn't just speaking as a psychologist, he was revealing a hidden truth about how love moves beneath the surface of our awareness. The man who casually mentions future plans with you in them isn't just making conversation. His soul has already started to include you in the architecture of his life. Whether it's a passing comment about a trip, a home, or a lifestyle he dreams of, these aren't random thoughts. They are soul-level instincts quietly shaping the reality he's beginning to accept. And when your absence creates a weight in his chest that he can't quite name, that emotional void is not a sign of weakness. It's the subconscious mourning your energy, your presence, your grounding essence that brought balance to his inner world without you ever needing to try. This is where spirituality merges with psychology. The awakening begins not with the confession, but with the undeniable evidence that his entire being is adapting to the spiritual development brought forth by love. You'll notice how his choices start to shift. He may not even realize it, but you become a silent influence in his daily decisions. Not because you're demanding, not because you're controlling, but because your presence calibrates his intuition. He's aligning, slowly, to a new version of himself, where you are not just a partner, but a compass, This is the soul in motion, choosing before the ego fully understands. Spirituality teaches us that energy precedes evidence. And when you begin to see this energy ripple through his words, actions, and even hesitations, know that something sacred is unfolding. He may not yet say it. He may even seem confused. But that hesitation is not rejection. It's the mind catching up to the heart's decision. In the world of spiritual wisdom, love is not always loud. It doesn't always shout or perform. Sometimes, it whispers through timelines imagined together, through decisions made in alignment with your essence, through silence that aches, and through presence that heals. And that's the sign you must trust. Not the grand gestures, but the subtle transformations. Because when the soul has already chosen, the mind will eventually surrender. Not through logic, but through an unshakable knowing that this connection holds more than romance, it holds spiritual growth. The man who is more in love than he realizes will reveal it in how his life begins to shift, in how you become the gravity beneath his thoughts, and in how his future no longer feels complete without your light in it. 9. Trust the signs, not just the words. There is a certain kind of spiritual intelligence that speaks without words, an emotional frequency that transcends logic and reveals truth through behavior, energy, and presence. Carl Jung taught us that what remains unconscious will continue to shape our lives. And in love, this manifests most clearly when a man's soul chooses you before his mind can even explain why. He might not say it out loud, but the way he subtly orbits your life, the way his voice softens when he speaks to you, or how his eyes find you in a crowded room. These are not accidents. They are unconscious confessions. His lips may hesitate, but his soul is already speaking. Every shift in his behavior, every inconsistency in his composure around you, is a glimpse into a deeper truth he doesn't fully understand yet. If he seems distant and then suddenly attentive, or if he remembers things you said even when you thought he wasn't listening, it's because his inner world has been moved by you. Spiritual wisdom teaches us that the soul often recognizes before the mind does. His silence isn't rejection. It's the echo of a feeling too sacred for casual words. In a world obsessed with declarations and labels, real love unfolds in subtle transformations, in how his priorities shift, in how he starts seeking emotional depth, in how your presence makes him question who he thought he was. He may appear confused, but that confusion is the chaos of awakening. It's the crumbling of his emotional defenses, because you didn't just enter his life, you entered his unconscious. That kind of love doesn't scream, it transforms. The truth is, when a man is more in love than he realizes, it shows up in his evolution. Not in promises, but in patterns. Not in flowers, but in the way he begins to grow. Your energy is no longer just an external influence. It's something that has quietly embedded itself in his psyche. He becomes more aware, more protective, more present, and yet, he might not know why. Jung's concept of projection reminds us that what we see in others is often what we've buried in ourselves. So if he's pulled toward you, it's because you mirror something he's been searching for, something his soul remembers, even if his ego resists it. So trust the energy. Trust the gaze that lingers a second too long. Trust the tension in his voice when you speak. trusts the spiritual intelligence behind every small gesture that contradicts his words. Love this real doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be felt. And if you're feeling it, it's because something ancient has already been set in motion. His heart may be trying to catch up to what his soul already knows. He's in love, even if he doesn't realize it yet. The dark reason brilliant minds walk away from social life. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, wrote Carl Jung. And today, we invite you to explore the profound reason why the most brilliant minds often walk away from the noise of the crowd. Have you ever felt drained in social settings, or wondered why solitude feels like home to you? In this video from Spiritual Wisdom, we're diving into the powerful psychological truth behind why intelligence often leads to isolation, not as a weakness, but as a sacred path of clarity, depth, and self-realization. Comment below. I choose solitude for my spiritual growth if you resonate with this journey. And don't forget to share your experiences. Your voice may awaken someone else's truth. The dark reason brilliant minds walk away from social life. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, wrote Carl Jung. And today, we invite you to explore the profound reason why the most brilliant minds often walk away from the noise of the crowd. Have you ever felt drained in social settings, or wondered why solitude feels like home to you? In this video from Spiritual Wisdom, we're diving into the powerful psychological truth behind why intelligence often leads to isolation, not as a weakness, but as a sacred path of clarity, depth, and self-realization. Comment below. I choose solitude for my spiritual growth if you resonate with this journey. And don't forget to share your experiences. Your voice may awaken someone else's truth. 1. Intelligent minds crave depth, not distraction. Brilliant minds do not retreat from society because they despise it. They step away because they see through it. In the words of Arthur Schopenhauer, talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. This is not simply about intelligence. It's about a spiritual sensitivity to depth, to truth, to the energy beneath surface appearances. Carl Jung, a master of depth psychology, observed that many intellectually gifted and spiritually awakened individuals begin to feel estranged from the superficial rituals of social life. They are not interested in climbing social ladders built on performance and pretense. They are seekers of inner truth. To them, constant noise, artificial smiles, and status-driven conversations feel like a betrayal of authenticity. They see the game's ego-driven performances masked as friendship, gossip disguised as bonding, competition dressed up as casual talk. What the average person calls socializing, the awakened mind often experiences as spiritual noise, cluttering their clarity, distorting their energy, and diluting their purpose. These rare individuals crave a different frequency, one where silence speaks louder than words, and where solitude becomes a sacred space for expansion rather than a void to escape. They understand that social approval often comes at the cost of self-abandonment, and so they choose stillness. They are not antisocial. They are energetically discerning. They sense the weight of every room, every glance, every conversation. Their nervous systems reject small talk because their souls are designed for truth. The moment An interaction lacks sincerity, their entire being withdraws. This is not arrogance, it is spiritual intelligence. They understand that not every circle is meant for their energy, and not every conversation is worthy of their attention. They seek conversations that nourish the spirit, not performances that drain it. They don't isolate to disconnect from others. They withdraw to reconnect with themselves. In solitude, they hear the truth behind the noise. They remember who they are. In a world addicted to stimulation, their silence becomes a rebellion. In a culture obsessed with visibility, their invisibility becomes a source of power. They do not crave to be seen. They crave to see clearly. And clarity rarely lives in crowds. In their solitude, they don't find loneliness. They find alignment. They reflect. They journal. They question. They observe patterns. They trace emotions to their roots. They engage with their inner world like an artist refining a masterpiece. This sacred withdrawal is not weakness. It is preparation. They are not running from life. They are preparing to live it more consciously. Their retreat is their training ground. Their detachment is their devotion. Their solitude is their sanctuary. In this space, spirituality is no longer a concept. It becomes a lived, breathing force. This is not a rejection of the world, but a deeper engagement with the soul's calling. Spiritual awakening is not loud. It is subtle, quiet, and often misunderstood. But for those who know, who feel, who remember, it is the only path that makes sense. 2. Solitude is not loneliness. It's liberation. Solitude is not a prison. It is the sacred workshop of the soul. For brilliant minds, it is not the absence of people, but the presence of deeper truths, where authenticity no longer needs to compete with performance. Carl Jung didn't view solitude as isolation, but as a necessary container for inner integration, a place where the unconscious can rise into the light without distraction. In a world obsessed with connection, noise, validation, and approval, the spiritual seeker often finds themselves fatigued by the superficial, sensing that something more honest waits beyond the applause. This is where solitude enters not as a punishment, but as a return to the self. It is in solitude that the masks fall away. You no longer have to perform. You no longer have to edit your truth to make others comfortable. You no longer have to dilute your brilliance to avoid standing out. You simply are, and in that state of being, something sacred begins to unfold. As Schopenhauer said, the intelligent person seeks solitude not because they hate people, but because they find richness in their inner world that the outer one rarely reflects. They are not antisocial. They are inwardly nourished by contemplation, by silence, by depth. This is not an escape. It is a conscious choice to shift from external approval to internal alignment. Spirituality, at its highest form, does not bloom in the noise of the world, but in the stillness of the heart. And for the awakened mind, solitude is the gateway to spiritual development. It becomes the place where intuition sharpens, where emotional wounds are observed without judgment, and where higher awareness is no longer clouded by the expectations of society. You begin to notice how much energy is drained in the performance of social life, how the smile you wear can betray the question screaming in your soul, how laughter can become a mask to hide existential discomfort. But in solitude, those illusions fade. You are no longer trapped in the character others expect you to play. Instead, You are given permission to meet yourself, to ask deeper questions, to create without censorship, to cry without shame, and to listen to the whispers of your own knowledge. It is not loneliness. It is communion with the self. And in that communion, a higher truth emerges. The soul does not thrive on constant connection, but on meaningful alignment. In solitude, you begin to hear the voice beneath the voice. You become aware of your thoughts as patterns, your emotions as messengers, your silence as presence. You see how solitude is not the absence of love, but the space where real love can enter, the kind that is not built on roles or needs, but on pure being. You discover that spiritual development is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it looks like sitting quietly with your thoughts, refusing to run, refusing to numb, choosing instead to feel, to face, to awaken. The more you do this, the more you realize that solitude is not something you endure. It is something you earn. It is the reward of self-respect, of inner maturity, of emotional sovereignty. And while the world may not understand your withdrawal, your quiet, your need for space, it does not have to. Because you are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to understand yourself. And solitude is where that understanding becomes possible. So when brilliant minds walk away from social life, it is not a failure of connection. It is the birth of presence. It is the moment when a soul reclaims its power, not by being louder, but by becoming deeper. It is a silent revolution, where performance ends and truth begins. In this space, spirituality is not just an idea, it becomes your atmosphere. And the one who embraces solitude is not retreating from life. They are rising into it, fully, consciously, and with the kind of clarity only silence can provide. Three, social settings feel misaligned with inner depth. The more spiritually awakened you become, the harder it is to tolerate the superficiality that defines most social interactions. It's not that you believe you're better than others, it's that your inner world has become too deep to be fed by shallow conversations. You walk into rooms where people are laughing, talking, performing roles they've been conditioned to play, but none of it reaches you. You feel like a foreigner in a place you used to call home. Carl Jung understood this dissonance well. He saw that as the psyche becomes more individuated, it becomes less compatible with the collective mask society wears. What used to be acceptable now feels artificial. What used to entertain now feels empty. And so, without drama or conflict, the intelligent mind begins to drift not out of anger, but out of necessity. Not because it hates people, but because it finally loves itself enough to stop draining its energy in places where its essence is not seen, heard, or honored. In most social settings, you are not truly there. You may smile, nod, or offer polite words, but inside, you're somewhere else, disconnected, observing, retreating inward. The crowd talks about the weather, the news, or what someone else did, but your soul craves silence, truth, meaning. You're not antisocial. You're selectively social. You're not avoiding people. You're protecting your peace. The more self-aware you become, the more sensitive you become to energy, inauthentic energy, performative energy, draining energy. And in protecting your energy, you walk away, not out of superiority, but survival. The choice to walk away becomes a spiritual act, a declaration that your inner world matters more than outer approval. You stop forcing yourself into environments that require you to shrink, pretend, or conform. You'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded in illusion. You'd rather sit with your thoughts than scream over noise. Intelligence, when paired with spiritual wisdom, becomes unbearable in false spaces. That's the dark reason brilliant minds walk away, not because they are cold or broken, but because they've tasted the stillness of presence and can no longer stomach the chaos of pretense. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. For those who see the mystery, the sacred, the invisible fabric of life, small talk is too loud, and empty rooms are more alive than crowded spaces. Solitude becomes a sanctuary, silence becomes a song, and presence becomes the only performance worth showing up for." So the brilliant mind slips away, not to isolate, but to integrate, not to disconnect, but to reconnect with something purer. And in that sacred withdrawal, something beautiful happens and the soul breathes again. 4. Society runs on ego, not truth. Society often disguises itself as a place of truth, but as Schopenhauer sharply pointed out, it is more often built on the fragile foundation of ego. People gather, speak, and interact not always to share wisdom or authenticity, but to seek validation, to reinforce their sense of control, or to escape the discomfort of being alone with themselves. This endless performance may feel ordinary to most, yet to those who crave authenticity and meaning, it becomes unbearable. They begin to see through the veil, the small talk, the competition for status, the constant need to prove one's worth, and they recognize that these are not acts of genuine connection, but rituals of ego. What society celebrates as social life, they feel as a burden. Their withdrawal is not a rejection of life, but an embrace of it, because stepping away from the noise allows them to see reality clearly, unfiltered by vanity and social conditioning. Schopenhauer described this tendency as the natural instinct of deeper minds to retreat into solitude, and Carl Jung echoed it when he declared, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For those on a journey of spirituality and spiritual awakening, solitude is not loneliness, but liberation. In solitude, the individual is no longer forced to play roles that suffocate the soul. Instead, they can observe themselves honestly, listen to the whispers of their inner being, and rediscover truths that society obscures. When stripped of distractions, the human spirit becomes sharper, more creative, and more authentic. Solitude provides the stage not for ego's drama, but for truth's quiet revelation. And in this silence, one begins to experience a profound clarity that no crowd can ever offer. In the modern world, these insights are even more visible. Social media has become a global stage where countless people chase likes, comments, and followers. But beneath the surface, what drives this activity is rarely the truth. It is ego, desperate for validation and fearful of invisibility. The perfectly crafted images, the witty captions, the competition for attention are not signs of connection, but signs of insecurity. For the spiritually awakened, such spaces feel hollow. They sense that this endless pursuit of approval erodes authenticity and distracts from the deeper work of becoming. By stepping back from these patterns, they do not turn away from life, but toward life's essence. They choose truth over performance, alignment over appearances, clarity over confusion. Of course, solitude is not without its challenges. To walk away from ego-driven environments often invites misunderstanding. Friends may question why you prefer a quiet evening over a crowded gathering, or why you choose reflection over entertainment. At times, the silence can feel heavy, almost like loneliness. But the distinction is vital. Loneliness is the absence of others, while solitude is the profound presence of yourself. In that presence, you encounter your own depth, your untapped creativity, your spiritual wisdom. Solitude strengthens the inner compass, giving you the ability to re-enter the world with clarity rather than compromise, to speak with authenticity rather than performance, and to live with freedom rather than conformity. Society may run on ego, but your spirit runs on truth. To retreat is not to escape, but to awaken. To walk away is not to reject, but to align. When you allow yourself to step beyond the noise, you create the space where spirituality flourishes and spiritual awakening unfolds. In that silence, you finally recognize that the greatest connection you will ever experience is not found in the approval of others, but in the clarity of your own soul. 5. The need for solitude starts young. Many brilliant and sensitive individuals feel out of place early in life, sensing a quiet dissonance in the way social life unfolds around them. While others may eagerly join the crowd, these gifted minds often perceive something hollow in superficial exchanges and begin to question whether belonging means sacrificing authenticity. Over time, this inner questioning deepens, and instead of conforming, they choose to value the richness of their inner world. As Carl Jung observed, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. For those on the path of spiritual development, solitude becomes less of a rejection and more of a sanctuary, a sacred space where they can finally listen to their own soul without interference. By stepping away from constant noise and expectation, they begin a process of self-realization that no social approval can provide. Spirituality teaches that true growth is never found in the applause of the many, but in the silence where you discover who you are. For the mind that longs for depth and meaning, the endless cycle of shallow interactions quickly becomes suffocating. Solitude, then, is not isolation, but protection, a way to guard their energy, cultivate focus, and turn their attention toward questions that go beyond appearances. Just like a seed must rest in darkness before it breaks open to reach the light, a gifted soul requires solitude as fertile ground for spiritual awakening and transformation. Those who feel different often mistake their withdrawal as weakness, when in truth, it is a profound act of wisdom. Walking away from meaningless dynamics does not diminish life. It enriches it by clearing space for clarity, strength, and purpose. The world may encourage constant interaction, but the greatest thinkers and visionaries remind us that solitude is essential to higher awareness. They did not embrace quiet because they despised people, but because they understood that their true work required inner stillness. Solitude is liberation, not loneliness, a place where spirituality and authenticity converge, allowing the individual to align with deeper truths that cannot be heard in the crowd. To feel the pull of solitude is to recognize that your inner voice is growing louder than external noise, guiding you toward a stage of spiritual development where authenticity matters more than acceptance. Protect your quiet hours, because they are the soil in which your purpose takes root. the space where insight becomes transformation. When the world feels shallow, turning inward does not separate you from life. It prepares you to connect with it more deeply, to give back with greater authenticity and wisdom. 6. Solitude enables self-mastery and awakening. When you enter solitude, you are stripped of every mask that society places upon you, and what remains is the unfiltered truth of who you really are. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Alone, you come face to face with your fears, your doubts, your desires, and your hidden brilliance. This is not always comfortable. Silence has a way of exposing the very things we often run from. Yet in this discomfort lies the seed of transformation. Without the noise of others, without the endless need to perform or please, you discover the values, the creativity, and the purpose that were buried under layers of expectation. Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher Jung admired, wrote, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people." Social life, with its rules, masks, and small talk, can easily become a stage where authenticity is sacrificed. The brilliant mind senses this loss more keenly than most. That is why so many intelligent people step away from the crowd, not because they despise others, but because they understand that constant conformity erodes the essence of their being. Solitude, then, is not a prison. It is a liberation. It is the soil where intelligence deepens and spiritual wisdom begins to awaken. The dark reason behind their withdrawal is that intelligent individuals see through the emptiness of shallow interaction. They notice how conversations circle around trivialities, how gatherings drain energy instead of feeding the soul, and how people cling to roles instead of truth. For them, such environments feel suffocating. Instead, they turn inward, where meaning, insight, and creativity reside. This is not escapism, it is survival. It is the realization that spiritual awakening requires silence, and silence requires courage. In the stillness of solitude, the unconscious begins to whisper, and those whispers are often the very truths that reshape a life. Great discoveries were rarely born in noise. Newton's apple did not fall in a marketplace. It fell in the quiet of nature. Jung's groundbreaking work emerged not in the crowd, but in the hours he spent alone, exploring his inner world. The solitude that once feels like loneliness slowly reveals itself as a companion, teaching you that the greatest company you will ever have is your own soul. In this sacred space, your intelligence sharpens, your imagination blooms, and your spirit learns what freedom truly is. When you feel uneasy in social situations, when you sense that chatter and performance leave you drained rather than nourished, recognize this as a signal. It is not a weakness, it is a calling. Solitude is inviting you to awaken, to detach from the roles that no longer serve you, and to uncover the depth of your own mind. It teaches you that walking away from the crowd does not mean rejecting life. It means embracing it more authentically. To step into solitude is to step into truth, and in that truth lies the power to become unshakable, authentic, and fully alive. 7. Silence reveals what the world tries to hide. In solitude, thinkers begin to uncover the hidden architecture of human life, noticing why silence terrifies so many, why distraction is lifted up as if it were a virtue, and why countless relationships exist not from love, but from a shared attempt to avoid themselves. This awareness cuts deeply, because to see clearly is to recognize how fragile much of social life really is. Yet it also liberates, for silence reveals what noise has always worked to conceal. Carl Jung reminded us, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. And this awakening is the foundation of spirituality and spiritual awakening, the inner turning where solitude is no longer emptiness, but revelation. As you sit with silence, it becomes impossible not to notice how conversations often serve as barriers, words stacked upon words to keep the speaker from facing their own unease. Laughter at crowded tables, endless exchanges of opinions, and constant commentary are rarely about truth. More often, they are strategies to avoid the stillness that would expose hidden fears. Those who are drawn toward spirituality sense this instinctively. They withdraw, not because they lack love for people, but because they will no longer settle for illusions disguised as connection. They discover that many friendships are built upon habit, convenience, or fear of loneliness. And once you recognize this pattern, you can no longer pretend not to see it. This recognition first brings grief, because it strips away the comforting stories you were taught about belonging and companionship. You begin to see how society glorifies distraction, how it trains people to run from themselves with entertainment, gossip, and endless noise. What is called connection is too often disconnection, a performance meant to silence the deeper questions rising from within. Love itself becomes confused with dependency, a clinging not born of wholeness, but of fear. To see this clearly is painful, yet that pain is a doorway, for it frees you from illusions that once held you hostage. Solitude, once feared, transforms into a sacred sanctuary where your mind clears, your heart steadies, and your spirit expands. In the quiet, you begin to understand that silence is not a void, but a mirror. It shows you the truths you once resisted. It reflects your wounds and your longings, and it opens the path to an authentic life. Spiritual awakening is nothing less than the courage to face this mirror without flinching, to let silence strip away every mask until you are left with only what is real. This is why brilliant minds often walk away from social life. They are not rejecting humanity, but seeking truth. They hear in silence what society drowns out, the quiet call to become whole. And in choosing solitude, they exchange illusions for clarity, dependency for freedom, and noise for a wisdom that no crowd can offer. 8. The courage to choose solitude is rare. Society often misunderstands solitude, mistaking it for antisocial behavior, depression, or cold detachment. Yet for the wise and for brilliant minds, solitude is never about escape, but about elevation. To choose solitude is to choose clarity over noise, depth over distraction, truth over superficial approval. It is a deliberate act of courage, for it requires stepping away from the crowd to stand face to face with yourself. Solitude allows you to reclaim your power, not the kind that dominates others, but the inner mastery that no one can take away. As Carl Jung said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. And it is in the silence of solitude that this awakening begins. When you are alone, the expectations of society fall away, and what remains is your raw essence, the part of you that yearns not for applause, but for alignment with a higher purpose. For those devoted to spirituality, solitude becomes a sacred ground where spiritual development deepens. where the restless mind grows still and the soul begins to speak. In solitude, you are no longer pulled by the tides of other people's opinions, but carried by the current of your own inner wisdom. History shows us that many of the greatest thinkers, visionaries, and creators sought solitude not because they rejected humanity, but because they understood that creativity and wisdom often bloom in silence. Solitude becomes the soil where your imagination grows strong roots, where your thoughts become sharper, and where clarity emerges like sunlight breaking through the fog. What the world calls loneliness, the awakened spirit calls liberation. For solitude is not emptiness, but presence, the presence of your truest self, unmasked and unshaken. In choosing solitude, you discover that you are never truly alone. For in that silence, you find connection to something greater than yourself. It is in solitude that you encounter the divine, hear the whispers of intuition, and awaken to the higher truths hidden beneath life's distractions. This choice is rare because it demands courage, but it is also transformative, for it teaches you that fulfillment is not found in the noise of the world, but in the depth of your own being. Solitude gives you back to yourself, reminding you that true strength lies not in the acceptance of others, but in the alignment of your spirit with its purpose. To walk this path is to embrace liberation, to nurture creativity, to sharpen wisdom, and to open the door to spiritual growth that leads you toward becoming the fullest expression of who you are meant to be. 9. Solitude is a spiritual rebellion. Solitude, when seen through the lens of intelligence and spiritual wisdom, is not simply about being alone, but about reclaiming the highest form of independence. In a world consumed by noise, distractions, and conformity, the act of choosing stillness, authenticity, and inner truth becomes a radical rebellion. Carl Jung once observed, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." This captures why brilliant minds often withdraw from society, not out of disdain for others, but because the superficiality of constant socializing feels like a heavy mask that suffocates the soul. To them, solitude is not emptiness. It is a sanctuary where clarity, peace, and authenticity can thrive. Schopenhauer believed that the truly intelligent person gains more satisfaction in self-reflection than in social gatherings, because they see how often human interaction revolves around vanity, envy, and shallow talk. Conversations filled with gossip or trivial competition cannot nourish the deeper hunger of the mind and soul. For those with heightened awareness, being immersed in such environments creates a spiritual dissonance, a sense that their inner depth cannot be expressed. Solitude then becomes their oxygen, a necessary space to breathe, to think freely, and to protect their essence from being diluted by noise. What may appear to others as isolation is, in truth, an act of courage to preserve authenticity in a world that rewards conformity and punishes uniqueness. Carl Jung reminded us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege often demands separation from the crowd. Spiritual awakening requires peeling back illusions, breaking free from collective expectations, and unmasking the unconscious games of society. When you begin to awaken, you see the desperate need for validation, the endless distractions, and the subtle manipulations that keep people trapped in roles not their own. To remain aligned with truth the brilliant soul steps away not in arrogance, but in devotion to clarity. Intelligence, at its highest form, is not only the ability to think, but also the discipline to protect the mind and soul from corruption. This quiet departure is not rejection. It is preservation, a rebellion of the spirit that values truth over approval and depth over applause. Solitude is liberation, not loneliness. It is the fertile soil where creativity blooms, where insights are born, where transformation becomes possible. In silence, the mind hears what the world cannot teach. In stillness, the soul encounters wisdom that no crowd can deliver. The dark reason brilliant minds walk away from social life lies not in hatred for people, but in a deeper love for truth, clarity, and spiritual independence. Misunderstood by many, their choice is actually a luminous act of protection, guarding their essence so that it may continue to expand and evolve. And while the world may see it as detachment, it is in fact the most profound act of connection, a connection to one's truest self, a connection to the eternal source of wisdom, and a connection to the freedom that only solitude can give. And perhaps now you understand why some of the most brilliant minds retreat from the noise of the world not out of arrogance or fear, but as a sacred act of preservation and clarity. As Carl Jung taught us, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. If this message resonated with your soul, let it be a reminder that solitude is not a flaw, it's a sanctuary for transformation. If you found value in today's video, please like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the powerful truths we reveal in our upcoming episodes. Your journey matters, and you're not walking it alone.